Hi, I'm Mary McNamara, television critic for the Los Angeles Times. Welcome to our Emmy Contenders Chat series. And this year, as last year, we have the lovely Tracee Ellis Ross.
That's me.
Remember, I mixed up your name last year.
I can't remember, did you?
I did. It was humiliating.
No, it wasn't, because I don't even remember it.
There you go.
There you go.
I remember it.
Okay.
You always remember the worst things. She is the star of Blackish, and Blackish has had one hell of a year.
It's been a really exciting year.
A really good season, a terrific, terrific season. And so let's talk about that. Did you know when you were, you came out of the box, that show came out of the box super strong with the premiere episode was The Word.
Yeah.
And it was hilarious and also really a very sophisticated conversation about something that we talk about all the time, which is the N-word.
And we don't usually talk about it in the context of making it funny.
No, not at all. And also in the context, for those of you who did not see it, it was Jack is singing Gold Digger.
So Jack is the youngest son.
Yes.
Which I thought was a really smart way to introduce that word. And I knew we were going to do the episode on the N-word. I didn't know what the storyline was going to be. And when I saw that it was Jack and sort of how they introduced it, I just thought was really smart. Really smart and in line with how we introduce those kinds of topics on our show.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so then, so you didn't know how it was going to go. Mm-hmm. Did you have any participation in how your character was, so Rainbow was the one who was the zero tolerance policy at the school from which Jack is kicked out.
So what we did was that Jack, the youngest, who's I think at the time of this was supposed to be somewhere like 8 years old, and in a school talent show, his favorite song is the Gold Digger song. And in the talent show, he does not do the proper version.
He does the explicit version.
He does the explicit version and full on says the N-word, and everything kind of screeches to a halt. And then, Dre brings that information back, and Bo, who represents this sort of zero tolerance policy that is very much in line with the way she was raised, very hippie, sort of much more of an open household, a lot more love and sort of tolerance and all things like that, has a completely different point of view of this is just not okay. But the thing that was so interesting is that because it was her son, she sort of gets a little wobbly in her response to it. And I think that's one of the things that's so interesting about the way we handle these topics on the show is that there's not sort of a rigid stance on things, but it's sort of like the exploration of how these specific individuals are handling some of these larger, heavier, sharper topics.
And what was the response? I know the critical response was very positive and very, what kind of, did you get fan response?
In general, there's really wonderful response to the show. I think the people really identify and see their families in our show. For me personally, a lot of the people that come up to me are young, and let me just be clear that I am not one to necessarily delineate black or white or the race, but in the context of the story that I'm going to tell, or sort of the context of this, I think it's important. So young white boys, 8 to 12, for example, come up to me and they love the show. And so to know that for a younger generation of kids that don't really have a relationship to the N-word, hear the N-word in music and things of that nature, and don't understand the historical context of the word, to know that they're watching the show and having an entry point for dialogue with their families and with each other around the larger context of something like the N-word, or even our Hope episode with police brutality.
Right.
To give not an answer, or the gun episode, not an answer for how we are saying you should feel or what are the right ways to handle these kinds of topics, but an entry point for conversation for families and people. And I think that's what one of the things that Kenya Barris, who created our show and is our executive producer, really does beautifully is not attempt to answer questions or speak for anyone, but instead create a dialogue and a way for us to be having conversations about some of these larger, sharper topics.
Yeah, and you mentioned a couple of the other, I mean, there were, the whole season was incredibly solid. And one of the things that I love about Blackish is that it has this really wonderful, like, overall pacing, which is you'll get an episode that deals with a very serious topic in a funny way. And then you'll get a couple of episodes that deal with kind of like, you know, whatever, you know, spending or kids or whatever.
Yeah.
And then you get another one.
Being sick, that was one of my favorite episodes this season.
Exactly. I like the one about like we're spending too much money because like that's a conversation that we have when you look at the credit card bills.
Having,
it's like, what are we spending our money on?
Cable bills.
So when you see so let's talk about you dealt with guns.
Yeah.
You dealt with religion, which I mean it was like you dealt with all the things that you're not supposed to deal with on TV.
A comedy.
And then of course you had as the centerpiece of the season, and very wisely, literally the centerpiece of the season, that wonderful episode of Hope, which was like an amazing piece of television, freestanding even of, you know, of the season itself. Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, did you know that was coming? And it was staged differently. It was shot differently.
It was shot like a play. It all took place in the one room. You know, I'll sort of pull back a little bit and say one of the things that I think that our show does that's really interesting to me is our show, in essence, is a multi-generational, character-driven comedy, period. Our show is also a show about a family that doesn't happen to be Black, but a family that is Black. But the show is not about us being Black. So really, it's the show of an American family. And what we do on Blackish is really dive into what an American family is dealing with in this day and age, culturally in this country. So many of these things that are coming up for us. How you raise your kids where you have such a different relationship to we didn't have social media, for example, when we were children, and sort of our kids are being inundated with so much information because of what they have access to that we didn't. And how do you navigate all of that? And I feel like our show kind of takes these topics that are on the wallpaper of our lives that we're walking by all day long, sometimes getting snagged up against, sometimes not, and takes that topic or that thing off the wall and puts it in the middle of the floor of this family. And we see how this family interacts with that thing, trips over it, decides to put it back on the wall or to take it apart and put it in a couple of pieces on the wall instead of just leaving it as it was, how the family gets changed by the thing that's on the floor, how Dre grows by whatever that thing is. And I think, so some of these larger topics are really things that all of us as Americans are kind of bumping up against right now, especially as we move into this election. There's a lot of those things that are affecting very deeply all of us. And the Hope episode, sort of at the center of the season, in essence, when it came about for Kenya, was really more about his younger children being inundated with social media, and how do you protect or field or translate all of this information to your children. And then the landscape of that happened, the topic that was chosen for that was an ideal and perfect topic of police brutality in this country right now. And they, and I should say right now, I say right now, but not right now, just sort of how it's at the forefront of the conversation, not that it has changed or gone away. And the episode all took place and in our living room, around the television. And it really speaks to that metaphor of like in the middle of the room. So here we are around the television dealing with this multi-generational response to a case that was made up for this, but yet we mention a lot of very real cases. And it really was, it was a special episode. It sounds so annoying because you're like, a very special episode, but it was special.
No, it was special.
It was written incredibly well. Kenya wrote the episode. It was just beautifully written. I think that underneath the topic of that was so heavy, we found comedy without making fun of what we were talking about, which I think Kenya and the writers do extremely beautifully on our show. And I think underneath it was what we have, I hope, earned through this season and a half by the time we got there, a relationship that people were invested in with this family. A couple that loves each other, children that are challenging the ideas of their father and their parents, and grandparents that sort of see the world very differently than both Dre and I and the children, and yet the deep connection between this family and how they walk through difficult things together without having a rigid point of view about how they feel about it necessarily, and sort of working it through as a family. And I thought it was challenging to play. It was interesting for me because the role of my character was very different than my personal feelings. I have a lot of very nuanced and intense feelings, as most of us do, and my character was playing a very different kind of role that was very important in the larger context of the story.
She was more but what about
the hope?
She was more like the system will work.
Yeah, and you know what I think it was? First of all, when I pulled back and saw the episode, I really understood, and we're playing a whole, and each of us has a piece of that, but the story as a whole has to remain and have its life, And so Bo, my character as the mom, really was identifying that relationship you have with the youngest children, where you want them to have an opportunity to find their own way with what's not working in the world, so that they have their own relationship to that, but you don't rob them of their ability to have a dream for a bigger life, than just being bogged down by the bad stuff.
Right, and you also want to be able to say it's going to be okay. That's what you want to be able to say.
You want to be able to tell your children
and then you come up, whatever the situation is, everyone has one, where it's like, it's not okay. You're right, the only realistic reaction to this situation is for you to be upset or hurt or scared. And it's really hard as a parent to let that happen when they're young.
It's really hard. And I think part of what it was for me that I loved is that Dre and Bo have a real relationship where they both have different points of view and they hold different spaces for their children, and they are different people for their children, and yet they are a united front. And in this episode, there's actually my favorite moment of the episode. Dre and I are sort of going back and forth, and the whole family is there on the couch. And Zoe's character she wants to go do her homework, and Dre gets upset that she wants to go when we're dealing with such an important topic. And he gets up to come around the couch, and Dre and I have been on opposing sides the entire time. But the way he gets up to come around the couch and the way the two of us interact, you hear him, he touches me and he says lovingly to me, "Excuse me." And to me, it is the core of what the show is, that you can have differing opinions. You can even be from completely different places and still be loving and kind to each other and still grow in how you see a situation. And I think that is what set the stage for that beautiful moment where Anthony just was stunning in how he delivered what so many of us felt on that night of the election, when Mr. and Mrs. Obama got out of the car hoping that they would be safe. And then you see a wife allow her husband his feelings, even though hers are different, and even though they're not totally different, they're just different in terms of what she's trying to do for her children. And so there were so many moments like that in the episode.
What I thought was great too about the episode
I don't even remember what you asked me, sorry.
No, I mean, we could talk about this particular episode all day long, but what I loved is that the humor that was provided, that like the A line of humor, was keeping the kids from the TV, keeping the little kids from the TV. And it was done through a series of
the takeout menus.
The takeout menus, and that was kind of like the running joke, and so that provided the levity for the more serious situation. But then as the episode unwound, you realize that the most heartbreaking thing about the whole show was that they were having to keep their kids away from the television. That it's like, that the truth was something that the kids had to be shielded from. And like that, that was what was, so the humor became the pathos. And that doesn't happen very often on a situation comedy. I mean, situation comedies, nowadays are very sophisticated. They deal with a lot of serious topics, but to have the narrative kind of fold back on itself like that is pretty amazing. But
yeah, you can,
Yeah, yay. And yay, you guys. I mean, so that was hard for you as a performer to not be able to,
I don't know that it was hard, but it was the right kind of challenging to take on a very different point of view on a topic that I personally feel so strongly about. But that's the beauty of my job, really. And I think part of what that does is allow me to try on something completely different. And we have a very creative, process-oriented show. Like we talk about these things. There's a lot of conversation for me around the kind of woman that I'm representing and how important that is to me, and how I make a real effort to make sure that because the story is told through Dre, that when I am on screen, that the story of who Bo is, remains full, even though we're not always telling her story.
Right.
So that I am not the paper thin wife character.
Right. Well, no, I mean, I think we talked about this last year, that one of the great things about the Johnsons is that they are an actual modern family, where they both work and they both parent and they both have issues with their parents and they both have issues with a lot of things.
Yeah.
But Bo is often, used as, I don't want to say the voice of reason, but like the loyal opposition.
Well, you know what? How I think I like to put it is that the show is told through Dre, but guided by me.
Yes, there you go.
Right?
That's good.
So it's his story, but to a certain extent, I kind of guide it in the way that I'm like I feel like a big part of my role is, what? Nah.
Okay, before I forget. So we've got a couple of questions here.
Okay.
One, how do you prepare before episodes, and are there things you do to get in a rainbow mode?
I don't do a lot of preparing. We don't have a lot of time for preparing. We have quite a hefty pace that we keep.
What is it? Did you do 23 episodes?
We did 24. It's a little bit like a marathon.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'll be honest, I do a lot of preparing in that I work out and I eat well and I get my sleep, because the job that Anthony and I, there are laws that protect the children.
But the adults are on their own.
We are on our own. So, I like to stay strong, and I like to get my rest, and I have to eat well, and
no truck food.
No truck food. I don't drink any alcohol when I'm working. Like Friday nights, I might be able to have a glass of wine, but that's about it. I need my brain to stay facile. We work a good 14-hour day. I'm often at work at 5:18, and it is joyful work, but it is work nonetheless. Anthony and I rarely sit down. There are series and series of photographs of Anthony and I asleep in our chairs in between takes. I swear to God, they're hilarious. We will sleep anywhere. I will, if I can close my eyes for 5 minutes. I mean, there's a picture of me standing up in between takes in one episode.
Okay, so you did that. You did that on the show. Didn't you fall asleep on the show?
Oh, I did.
Right, you did.
That was acting.
Because now, no. But I mean, because you're pregnant now.
Yes, Bo's character is pregnant.
I thought that was hilarious as someone who had her third child later in life.
Oh, you did?
It's like,
okay.
Yes, you just learn. It's like, it doesn't matter. If I am literally not being asked to do something, I will be asleep.
Oh, it's fair, and you really do. I mean, I'm not pregnant and have not been.
No, but I imagine having a show, being at that pace.
It's really interesting
to do, whatever you need to do.
Yep.
To get that.
Yes, I mean, yes. So how do I prepare? Truthfully, the character is so beautifully written. I don't need to do a lot to jump into it, but in an episode like Hope, where the point of view of my character is different from me, it takes a lot of conversation. I'm an actor that really needs to believe what I'm saying and what I'm doing. I can't just do it just because it's on the page. And so I do a lot of talking with Kenya and sort of having him explain. Kenya and I are friends and have been friends for many, many years. So often, he'll sometimes times, if he's not on the floor, be in his office, and we'll text each other. I'll be like, did you see that take? That's not feeling right. Do you have any suggestions? And the next thing you know, he'll appear on set, and he and I'll have like 2 seconds, and he'll be like, this is like, if you can remember when you, and I'll be like, oh my God. Or I'm a person that will ask for line readings. Like if I can't hear it, and I'm like, why am I not understanding this line? I'll ask a writer or something to just give me the line reading, and I'll be like, oh my God, it's like right there. So, and I ask Anthony a lot. Anthony is, Anthony and I have just such a lovely working relationship. And I mean, we just enjoy each other so much, and we really have each other's backs.
I think that really shows.
Oh, honestly, I've been in this business for a minute. It is such a great group of people. Our crew is incredible. You become such a family, but we have such a great working environment. And the truth is, we are working hard. Like, it's glamorous and it's fun when it comes on TV. It's so funny and all that. But, we're working really long hours, and we're there really early, and we work 8 months out of the year, and we're together. And the kids are phenomenal. I find it's such a blessing to work with kids every day. They're so joyful and wonderful and talented. I mean, they're so talented, these kids. They tickle me to no end. And working with Jennifer Lewis is like the most she's hilarious, amazing. Insane, fantastic. Yes. Like, I love that the world...
You guys have a great dynamic.
Oh, it's amazing. Did you see the sick episode when we were in bed together?
Yes.
Funniest thing in the world to me.
So funny. Okay, so Chantel on Twitter asks, do you think Beau's pregnancy will change the family dynamic?
I would imagine so. I would hope so. I have no idea. I mean, again, I'm not a writer on the show, and it's not a storyline that I came up with.
But that reflected a real life? I mean, Kenya's having another baby.
Kenya's having another.
Are we allowed to say that?
Yes, you can say that. I think that's pretty public. Yeah. So it was more about. I think it was more about.
Kenya's not having another baby. His wife is having another baby.
Right.
She's doing all the work.
She's doing the work. Kenya already has 5 children and is pregnant with his 6th, or he's not pregnant,
because
but
he's insane.
I guess so. I mean, I don't know. I don't have children, so I think it was more about, like, I don't really influence the actual storylines. I get in process on what gets presented to me.
Was that a big surprise?
It was a big surprise to me. If you want to know the truth,
did they just hand you the page?
Yeah. If you want to know the truth, it was a surprise. I was like, okay, fascinating. So it has had more to do with, I guess, the story that they broke, or sort of what they are imagining for this family going forward. I don't really know much more than that. But it was, I think it's kind of charming and wonderful. I will tell you that shooting that scene, I've not been pregnant, so it was a really special moment to be able to take that on and say, you know what I mean? And Kenya allowed that scene. Like, that was a lot of improv between Anthony and I, and that's so fun. Anthony and I love that. Like, so we just really leaned into that moment, and I thought the way that they edited that scene together and us looking over at the kids was just delicious. It was kind of amazing.
Do you know do you know how far along in the next season?
I actually don't.
You have no idea.
I don't think they're back in their room yet, so I'm sure that stuff is going to start being determined.
Okay, Tito on Twitter asks, what was your favorite reference line from the Good Times episode? So how fun was it? We'll talk about that for 1 second.
Okay, please.
So the finale,
we can talk about it for more than 1 second.
So the finale was, a loving, would you call it a loving spoof of Good Time? Was it an homage to Good Time?
I think it was a bit of an homage.
But it definitely had some it had like a little sharp edge to, like,
Where were the sharp edges? I'm curious.
Well, like the joke about the toe, if I hadn't lost a toe to this, I mean, it's like.
Or dessert, it's
like
hilarious.
They went places that Good Times did not go.
Right.
So.
Although, we now have made a habit of doing time travel for our finales.
Yes.
And I will tell you that the most interesting part of that is the female roles in the time travel.
Yes.
I'm like, oh my God, okay, let me just hunker down and be a 50s lady. You know what I mean? Like, it's really fascinating. Or, anyway. One of my favorite lines, I will say, and I think I'm going to hack it up now, but everybody should go back and look, but I whip out the pregnancy test, which is this big, and kudos to our props and set designers.
Was that a real pregnancy
test? Yes, it was. There was a dropper and a test tube, and he says, "Are you sure?" And Beau says, "Yeah." they're 65% accurate 25% of the time. Something insane like that. And I was like, I mean, it's such a, I don't actually remember the specifics.
Yeah, I remember it was really tiny percentage. You're like, why did anybody even take this test?
I thought it was hilarious.
Yes.
I thought it was hilarious. So that was one of my favorite lines, and it was just really fun. And I have to say that, like, you know, we have the most incredible hair, makeup, wardrobe, and set design, prop design. We have the most amazing people, but it's taken for granted because of how good they are week after week. But we do so many flashbacks, so sometimes there's hundreds of scenes per episode, and they're amazing. But then when we do these time travel episodes, you really get to see how incredible and what a collaborative art television is, and how none of that comes to life and becomes real if you don't have all those pieces. I mean, the hair, the makeup, like, just incredible. Like, incredible to me. Michelle Cole, costume department, amazing. Roxy Lindsay, Nadine Hicks, like, those are my peeps that, like, unbelievable to me what they did to transform me into Thelma. I just thought it was phenomenal. I mean, like, I was like, bah!
Did you watch Good Times when it was on?
I did.
Are you old enough to?
I'm not old enough to have watched
watch
it, but I of course saw reruns. And
did Norman Lear come to your set?
He did. He came to visit.
Did he come while you were filming that?
No, not while we were filming that, but he's friendly with Kenya, or Kenya's friendly with him. And, you know, I think one of the things that I forgot is how Good Times really dealt with heavy topics.
They did.
They really did. And so I got to experience more fully how our show really does nod to the Norman Lear way of television that I think is really exciting to be a part of that kind of legacy and that kind of storytelling.
Well, certainly in the second season, I mean, somewhat, I mean, it's like it became more confident. Like, that's what I felt as a critic watching
from the second season?
Yeah, it's like the second season was so much more confident.
Interesting,
and it was, you know, like, just dealing with all sorts of everything. And yes, definitely in the Norman Lear, change your world. Yeah,
in that vein, in a way that I thought is pretty great.
And so you mentioned earlier having, you know, white boys come up and say thank you for whatever. It's like, I
hate that that's going to come back, because I hate. I am of mixed race, and I am not.
But I think that.
I'm not a fan of that.
But I think with those kinds of topics, you know, white people want to know, okay, am I talking about it the right way? Do you know what I mean? It's like everybody's having these conversations, and it's like nobody wants to be offensive or
say things inappropriately,
or not understand, or like not, you know, everyone's life experience colors their opinions about everything. And so the more life experiences we can get, which is why diversity is so important on television. It's like, this is the best way we can do it, people. But so, are you seeing, I mean, what kind of response did you get to this season? Are you getting, you know, more fan feedback? Are you getting,
I think, you know,
is it the same?
It's the same. I think our show seems to be touching the right nerve in people, and I think it's really exciting. I think specifically my comment about young white boys was about the N-word episode in terms of rap music.
Because of that song.
Yes, because I believe that being able to understand the historical context, not just that song, just in general, pop music utilizes that word. It is floating about. And if you do not know the historical context or have never been given an opportunity to even understand what else is associated with that word and why, you wouldn't know to even question how you feel about using that word or singing it. And so when I thought about that, I thought that was a wonderful part of the fact that we are a show that families watch. To answer your question, one of the things that is so moving to me is that we have, to a certain extent, brought family television back. And when I say family, I don't mean that we're a family. I mean that families watch our show as a family. I've had so many parents and people come up to me and say, it's the one time a week that I sit down and do something with my kid that starts conversation and that brings us together, where we laugh together in front of the television. That's moving to me. I remember family television and watching stuff with my parents and with my mom and things like that. And so I'm very excited that our show does that. And young kids, where certain jokes go over their head, like, you really can watch it with your kids. And that's the main thing that I hear. People are like, oh my God, your family is just like my family. And we watch every week. I mean, I was in New York and a woman came up to me and said, I have a 12-year-old son. And there's not a lot he likes to do with his parents. But we watch Blackish together every week. And that's moving to me. I think
we watch Blackish as a family.
I love that.
Yeah. Well, because also, I mean, the characters are given equal time, too. It's like, it's not a kid's show. It's not an adult show. It's not an office show. I mean, one of my favorite episodes was the one about the swimming.
I love that episode.
That was so funny. But what I liked was the B plot, too, where like Jack and Diane were dealing with the gender roles.
How amazing was that?
It was so good. And when Diane saves him in the pool and has to say to her grandmother, no, I'm not doing the girly thing. I'm actually learning how to.
I was in love with that.
I love that show. I love that episode.
That was one of my favorite episodes this season. That and the sick episode. I just thought it was hilarious. I laughed out loud during that episode.
Yeah. Well, everybody's laughing out loud a lot. So
I
thank
love
you
that.
so much for
Thank
joining
you.
us. And thank you for joining us. And Blackish now is on, is it coming back in reruns?
I think we're in reruns through the summer, yeah.
Okay, so reruns through the summer so you can catch up on season 2 and then we'll be all set for season 3.
Or you can go to abc.com and you can catch it up that way.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.